When he laughed at me across the table, it wasn't the words that hurt. It was the way he looked at me, like I was less. Like everything I'd ever worked for, every quiet victory, every scar I'd hidden behind my calm, meant nothing. He said something in German, sharp, cold, deliberate, and the guests chuckled politely, pretending not to understand. But I did. Every word. And that was the moment it broke, not my composure, but the last piece of me that ever wanted his approval. My name is Jocelyn Barrett, and that night I decided one thing: if he wanted to play this game in German, I would finish it perfectly. The chandelier above the Goethe Institute glittered like a crown of ice. Voices in polished German rippled through the room, clipped and confident, every syllable carrying a quiet declaration of power. I stepped through the oak doors, heart steady, but hands trembling just enough to betray the truth: this wasn't my world. Daniel greeted me with a small smile, the kind that could calm a storm. His father's smile, though, was different, trained, diplomatic, the kind of courtesy that had sharp edges. Otto Kruger extended a hand, his grip firm, his eyes measuring. "So you speak several languages," he said, tone smooth as glass. "5 fluently. But I prefer listening. Listening, a rare skill in Americans." Laughter, restrained but audible, fluttered around the table like dust. I didn't flinch. Then his voice dropped, German sliding from his tongue like a knife drawn from silk. "Sie sieht billig aus." A glass clinked somewhere down the table. The air grew still heavy with the weight of pretense. I set my wine down, looked straight at him, and answered in his language, in his rhythm, but not his tone. Sometimes silence costs more than words. The laughter died. The only sound was a fork slipping from someone's hand. Otto froze, surprise flickering across his face. "To understanding," I said softly, raising my glass, before I took a slow sip. Outside, snow began to fall. Each flake shimmered beneath the streetlight like a quiet applause. He hadn't just insulted me, he'd underestimated me. And that, I thought, was the wound that would never quite stop bleeding. The apartment sat quiet on the hill above Denver, its windows fogged by the cold. I dropped my purse on the counter and stood still for a long moment, the silence pressing against my ribs. My mother used to say that language was the map of the soul. Maybe that's why hers never stopped echoing, even 10 years after she was gone. I pulled the old wooden box from the top shelf of my closet. Inside were the letters she'd written before her hands began to tremble from illness: faded paper, careful script. Every line a fragment of the woman who raised me to find truth in words. I opened one. The ink had bled into the page, but I could still make out the German. Bosnia, 1995. A German soldier pulled me from the rubble. His name was Otto. His eyes were kind but tired. My breath caught. Otto Kruger. The man who had humiliated me last night was the same man who had once saved my mother's life. I took out the photograph folded between the pages, my mother in her field uniform, standing beside a young German soldier. He was smiling faintly. She wasn't. Her eyes were already looking somewhere beyond him, maybe toward the future I was now living. You saved her once, I thought. But somewhere along the way, you lost the man she met. The snow outside thickened, wrapping the city in silence. I pressed the letter to my chest. The same language that had saved her had been used to wound me. Respect, I realized, isn't inherited. It's chosen one word at a time. The next morning, the hum of the university felt colder than usual. I was grading papers when my phone buzzed, an email from a contact at the State Department. "FYI, Kruger requested your personnel file." My stomach tightened. I clicked the attachment, scrolling past years of service records, evaluations, commendations. At the bottom, a note written in red ink: civilian consultant. Limited pedigree. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I leaned back in my chair and let out a short, bitter laugh. So that's it. He wasn't content with insulting me in public. Now he wanted proof I didn't belong. That evening, Daniel showed up at my door. He looked exhausted. "He just wants to protect the family's reputation," he said quietly. "By destroying mine?" I asked. He didn't answer. When he left, I sat for a while in the half-light, the city humming below. Then I pulled open my desk drawer and took out a thick folder stamped with the NATO insignia documentation from the 2020 Humanitarian Summit in Brussels. I had been chief interpreter for the German-Ukrainian delegation. Halfway through the report, one line stood out. Interpreter Barrett prevented diplomatic collapse due to mistranslation, and beneath it, the signature of the man I'd just confronted, O. Kruger. He had once trusted my words to correct his own. He just didn't know it. I traced the signature with my finger and wrote in my notebook almost without thinking. He used to represent a country. I represent conscience. Outside the window, the snow had begun to melt. Water traced thin paths down the glass. Whatever waited ahead, it wouldn't be revenge. It would be a test of whether I could defend my own dignity without losing the grace my mother left behind. The invitation arrived in a cream envelope embossed with gold lettering that shimmered beneath the morning light. Denver Foreign Policy Club. Dinner in honor of Ambassador Otto Kruger. When Daniel called, his tone was almost rehearsed. He wants to clear the air. I didn't hesitate. Clear it or control it. I went anyway. The navy dress felt heavier that night, the air thicker. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers hung like frozen constellations, their light bouncing off polished silver and ambition. Along the walls were portraits of men who had shaped the world. I knew Otto wanted to shape me, too. Reshape me maybe into something quieter. He sat at the head of the table, glass raised, smiling, as if nothing had ever cracked between us. Tonight we celebrate diplomacy, the art of choosing words that never offend. Laughter swept through the room like smoke. Then his eyes found mine. And we have a linguist among us, Miss Barrett. You must know how to weaponize language. Only to defend, I replied, letting the words hang just long enough. He leaned toward another German guest voice, low. She speaks like a machine, precise, no soul. I set my glass down steady. In perfect German, I answered softly, quoting Goethe. Sprache ist die Kleidung des Denkens. Language is the clothing of thought. Silence. Forks froze midair. At the far end, a scholar studied me. Barrett, NATO interpreter. Yes. The 2020 conference. I nodded once. Otto's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening around his glass. He remembered. After dinner, he summoned me to his study. The room reeked of history maps, medals, and dust polished into pride. He poured himself whiskey, didn't offer me any. You embarrassed me in front of my peers. No, ambassador. You embarrassed yourself. I only refused to translate your arrogance. You're quick with words. That's why you should have chosen yours carefully. The quiet stretched until it ached. Then he asked, low and certain, have we met before? Not me, I said, but you met my mother. He blinked as if hearing a name he hadn't spoken in years. I left the untouched glass on his desk and walked out, spine straight, heart steady. Outside, snow blanketed the city in white firelight. I looked back at the glowing windows. He's not my enemy, I thought. He's a test to see if I can stay kind while standing tall. It was near midnight when I heard the knock. Daniel stood there, guilt written across his face. Dad said tonight was unfortunate. Unfortunate is a flat tire. What he did was humiliation. He's old-fashioned Jocelyn. He'll never change if you push him. Then maybe it's time he feels the weight of his own words. The silence between us was sharp enough to cut through the air. He looked at me as if torn between loyalty and love, and for a moment I pitied him more than his father. The next morning, at the university, an email appeared on my screen. Dr. Kruger. Barrett, we'd like you to speak at the international conference next week. Topic, the cost of misinterpretation. I stared at it, then typed back one word, accepted. Maybe the only way to fight arrogance is by teaching understanding. Across town, Otto read the morning paper at his mahogany desk. Ambassador Kruger's son engaged to linguist Barrett. A friend laughed. You've raised quite a modern daughter-in-law. Otto's reply was dry. A woman with too many words always forgets who's listening. But his voice wavered, like even he knew the sentence no longer fit. That night I searched through my archive and found the treaty documents from 2018. My breath caught when I saw the signature at the bottom, O. Kruger. The same file containing my notes correcting his mistranslation, a small fix that had prevented a diplomatic disaster. He had once trusted my words without knowing who they belonged to. He used to represent a country, I thought. I represent conscience. I wrote the closing line for my upcoming speech. Every mistranslation costs something, sometimes a life. Then I turned off the light. Denver lay still beneath the snow, quiet before the storm neither of us saw coming. The Denver International Conference Hall blazed with light flags from 30 nations rippling gently along the walls. I stood backstage, gripping my speech notes until the paper bent beneath my fingers. The first line stared back at me. Language is not only how we speak, it's how we choose to see. I walked to the podium. The microphone carried my voice into a sea of expectant faces. Every mistranslation costs something. I said sometimes it costs a life. Silence spread through the hall. Behind me, the screen flickered to life maps of a conflict zone. Footage of relief efforts delayed the 2018 humanitarian treaty between Germany and Ukraine. The red highlight circled one line of mistranslation that had cost 27 civilians their lives, and just beside it, a signature, O. Kruger. I didn't speak his name. I didn't need to. When responsibility hides behind language, I said lives pay the price. Across town, the words reached him. Otto Kruger sat alone in his immaculate living room, a half-empty bottle of scotch beside him. My voice echoed from the television. Words can destroy quietly, and that's what makes them dangerous. His hand trembled. The glass slipped, shattered. He gasped, chest tightening, and crumpled to the floor. By the time his aide shouted for help, the camera had cut to applause. Later that night, my phone rang. Daniel's voice cracked through static. Dad's in the hospital, heart attack. I stood by the window, the snow outside the same color as the night he'd tried to humiliate me. Logic whispered that he deserved it. My heart refused to agree. He used words to hurt me. I used them to wake him. Maybe we both went too far. When I reached the hospital, the corridors smelled of antiseptic and exhaustion. Daniel's eyes were red. He asked for you. He won't rest until he sees you. I nodded, the air cold in my lungs. Sometimes the hardest language to speak, I thought, is forgiveness. The monitor's steady beeping filled the room, each note like a slow reminder that he was still here. Otto lay pale against the white sheets. When I stepped inside, his eyelids fluttered open. You came? You called. He studied my face, voice rough. Bosnia, 1995. Your mother, Annalise Barrett. She was the nurse, I nodded. You saved her. Maybe that's why I'm here, to return the debt. A faint laugh escaped him. Debt, no. I think I owe you now. You made me listen to the words I buried. The man who had once spoken from podiums now spoke like a student humbled by his own lessons. I used to think fluency was intelligence, he said. Now I see understanding is the real gift. Words are only dangerous when people stop meaning them, I replied. His eyes filled, one tear slipping down. For once, silence didn't protect him. It freed him. Daniel entered quietly. Dad, she didn't have to come. Otto shook his head. She had to. I needed someone who speaks both my languages, German and truth. I laid my hand gently on his. Rest. We'll finish the translation later. He smiled, faintly exhaled. In the hallway, Daniel caught up to me. You forgave him, not yet. But I stopped hating him. That's how forgiveness begins. Outside, the snow had stopped. On the glass, our reflections stood side by side, two people stripped of pride, learning a new language made of grace. War teaches you this. Not every battle needs a victor. Some just need witnesses. A month after Otto's release from the hospital, a heavy envelope arrived in my mailbox, its silver-embossed letters catching the morning sun. Denver Peace Institute, Gala Dinner, hosted by Ambassador Otto Kruger. Beneath the formal print, a line written in shaky handwriting read, "For reconciliation, not reputation." I read it twice before placing it on the counter. When the night came, I chose no gown, no uniform, just a simple navy dress, the color that had followed me through every quiet battle of my life. Daniel waited at the entrance, nervous but hopeful. He's different, Jocelyn. We'll see if words mean more than gestures. I told him. The ballroom shimmered with gold light and murmured voices. Diplomats, scholars, and reporters filled the room. Then Otto stepped onto the stage microphone, trembling slightly in his hand. His tone held no grandeur, only the humility of a man relearning how to speak honestly. A few weeks ago, I watched a woman on television remind the world that words can kill, and also heal. He began. I realized I have been fluent in languages, but illiterate in humility. He turned toward me. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dr. Sir Jocelyn Barrett, the linguist who reminded me that understanding is the highest form of intelligence. Applause rippled through the hall, soft at first, then rising. I felt tears sting my eyes. Not pride, not vindication, but something gentler. The man who once used words to wound, now used them to honor. After the dinner, Daniel found me near the exit, his eyes bright. He's changed. You changed him. No, I said quietly. He changed himself. I just spoke a language he'd forgotten. He dropped to one knee, voice low. Can we start over? Only when we both speak the same language, respect. He nodded. Understanding that it wasn't rejection, but a promise waiting to be earned. Across the room, Otto watched us, a faint, genuine smile softening his face. For the first time, there was no mask. No title, only peace sitting at the same table that had once broken it. The autumn sun over Denver fell soft and gold across the steps of the University of Colorado. A new banner fluttered in the breeze above the entrance, the letters bold against the pale stone Barrett Kruger Foundation for Language and Peace. For a long moment, I simply looked at it, the wind tugging at the ends of my hair. The quiet hum of students carrying across the courtyard. Otto stood beside me, dressed in a plain gray suit. No medals, no flag pin, no armor of rank. He looked smaller somehow, but truer. When he stepped up to the podium, the murmur of the crowd fell into complete silence. His voice, though older, carried a steadiness that no longer demanded power, it invited it. I once used words to divide, he began in English. Today, I use them to build bridges. There was a time I believed prestige was honor. She taught me that honor is humility that speaks. He paused, then switched seamlessly into German, his accent softer than I'd ever heard it. Ehre gebührt wem Ehre gebührt. The phrase rippled through the air, the same one that had once stung me like a blade. Now it landed differently, less a declaration, more a confession. The language that had wounded me had finally found its purpose. I walked up to the stage, met his gaze, and took his hand. Respect doesn't need translation, I said quietly. His smile reached his eyes for the first time. Then call me Otto. Applause rose gentle, but unending, the kind that doesn't celebrate victory, but survival. Later, outside the hall, a young reporter approached microphone trembling slightly. Dr. Barrett, do you forgive him? Forgiveness isn't given in words, I answered. It's shown in actions, and he just did. Otto stood a few steps away, watching. He nodded once, slow and solemn, the afternoon light reflecting in his eyes. For the first time, the world didn't see an ambassador or a linguist. It saw two people who had broken something and then rebuilt it one word at a time. A year later, the marble halls of the United Nations shimmered beneath 1,000 lights. The Global Peace Conference had gathered representatives from more than 60 nations, each flag rising like a promise behind me. I stood at the podium, my white suit crisp, the small NATO pin catching the light just above my heart. The hum of quiet conversation faded as I began to speak. We all speak different languages, I said, but the only one that saves us is respect. The words left my mouth steady and sure, rippling through the room like the calm after a long storm. A stillness followed, then applause, slow, collective rising until it filled the vast chamber. I bowed my head briefly, and when I looked up, my eyes found Otto. He sat in the front row, silver hair glowing under the soft light, Daniel beside him. When the clapping subsided, Otto stood. His voice carried through the hall, deep and resonant, in his native tongue. Ehre gebührt wem Ehre gebührt. No laughter this time. No awkward shifting. Only the sound of chairs scraping back as people rose to their feet. The phrase that had once been a weapon was now an offering. Daniel leaned close as I stepped down from the stage. He mocked you in German. Now he honors you in it. I smiled, the lump in my throat, soft but steady. Maybe that's what forgiveness sounds like. After the conference, I slipped outside onto the terrace. The New York skyline glittered against the night, reflected in the Hudson below, like a second universe. In the distance, Otto and Daniel spoke quietly, not as father and son defending pride, but as two men learning how to listen again. I leaned against the railing, the cool air brushing my face, and thought of my mother's words. Words can save or destroy. Choose what you build with them. The city lights trembled on the water, green and gold threads weaving across the dark. He once mocked me in German. Tonight he spoke it again, but this time it healed. The river shimmered beneath the moonlight, carrying the reflection of forgiveness, proof that even the harshest language can be cleansed when spoken with grace. 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 When spoken with grace.